Thank you for joining us on the New Mexico Suncast. I'm Jim Williams, and I'm joined in studio by Thomas Grover, former APD officer, now an attorney, and you'll be interested to hear about his story. Former Chief of Police Mike Geier. Mike, I appreciate you being here. And Brian McCutcheon. Brian is a former APD officer, was in charge of helping secure the balloon fiesta, which is very relevant at this time, and now works protecting people over at Calvary Church. So I really appreciate you all four of you being here.
You bet.
Let's start with this. We have a lot of crime going on in Albuquerque. There are various political perspectives on all of that. So I'm going to start with Chief Geier. What did our current mayor, Tim Keller, promise Albuquerque regarding law enforcement and crime prevention?
Well, he came on in 2017, was December. And I'm not sure if it was the month after or whatever, but he was on a press conference where he made a promise that it's the mayor's responsibility to reduce crime. And he made some other promises about, getting more APD officers, which would have helped in that regard. The original number that he was shooting for was 1,200. Neither of those came true, and later on, during his second campaign, he was confronted with that, and he made the statement is that it would be like a fantasy land to believe that could happen. And so he kind of totally turned around his format and kind of threw his initial statement to the dust.
Well, it's interesting how you frame that perspective, because you're reading quotes from news sources. I'm sure you've seen videos of his statements, and then to retract those some years later. I've heard a spin, and maybe I'll direct this to you, Brian. I've heard a spin that in 2019, I should say, Chief Geier, you were the chief of police in Albuquerque from when to when?
From December 7, 2017 to December 2020.
Okay, so right after COVID started, basically, there was a conflict between you and Keller?
Well, yes, in so many words. Different differences in philosophies, and I was being asked to do things. Well, a couple things. First of all, I was hired for my expertise and experience in law enforcement, and I was superseded in terms of having somebody have to write my speeches and write my press conferences, and we had little group practices whenever we would go before the media, rehearsals, so to speak, of what to say. But he made some things, some I would say, and I'm going to put it right out there, unethical decisions that he wanted us to do. And one in particular was it was during COVID, and there were issues with the protests that were going on as well as COVID. And whatever was going on, he was talking to a lot of the people that were the advocates with the protesters. As a matter of fact, he even walked out with them in some of the marches and whatnot they had. But in one particular case, there was a small restaurant downtown called Filling Phillies, and they had been looted on one of the nights of when they took over downtown, so to speak. There was a lot of damage downtown. And so they hired they knew some friends that were part of that Civic Guard at the time. So they brought the Civic Guard in after hours, and they sat in the restaurant to protect the restaurant whenever there was a protest near downtown. What happened is the people that were seeing them in there with the gun were actually trying to aggravate them by banging on the windows and things like that, and they were making false calls to the police saying they're pointing guns at us and things like that. So following that, the next day, the mayor called myself and Chief Paul Dow to his office, and he told us, he says, explain it to both of us, what our responsibility was. He told Paul Dow, he says, I want you to get your fire marshal to do a surprise inspection. And then he told me, he says, and I want you to have him backed up by some officers. And he goes, and I want you to search that building and take any guns out that you find. And both of us looked at each other and said, well, I spoke up, and so did he. is, well, I said, that's against the Fourth Amendment. I said, that's an illegal search. He says, no, we have the right to do a search for fire hazards and things like that. Yeah, but if you're doing it for a pretext, the wrong reason, it's not going to fly. And he fought us a little bit, and so we just kept quiet. And when we walked out, as we got to the elevator, both of us said, no, we're not going to do it. And Paul immediately called his battalion chiefs and says, if you get a call to do this, tell them to talk to me. And he never did it. He never called us back, but he had known what our stance was. And I thought just the fact that he brought that out as a solution, that's some of the things I saw that were, unethical, at that very least, if not just illegal.
So I'm just a voter. I'm just a citizen. I should say to all three of you, you've all put your lives on the line for people you don't even know. And I think that's amazing. I want to get a chance to introduce Tom and some of his background. I know he feels like what you all three have done and what you're doing is calling to protect people. And I just think sacrificing your time away from your families, putting your lives on the line is an amazing thing. Brian, let me go to you now, because Chief Geier's just outlined a story, which is easy to document, witnesses available, but I've never seen the media ever talk about anything like that. And we have a municipal election coming up the first week of November. And these are questions that the voters ought to be able to ask, shouldn't they?
Oh, absolutely.
I've talked to you in the past in preparation for this interview. In 2019, there were crime statistics. We were either at or near the bottom of the good list when it comes to both property crimes and violent crimes in the United States. I think that rank is still the same now 6 years later.
Actually, I think it's worse. I think during Mike's time, it was 46, depending on what the crime was. We were 46th or 45th or something like that when you came in. And then once he left, it even went further down.
So, Brian, my question is, though, I've heard it framed that crime during COVID went up. And now it's down from where it was during COVID.
Correct.
But the truth is we're still at the bottom of the good list and at the top of the bad list virtually in every crime category. So why has the mayor not had to answer to that to the public?
That's a question for the ages. Why his feet are not being held to the fire on this, and he's being allowed to gloss over or to dance around specific subjects along those lines. Why are people allowed to do drugs out in the open without enforcement? Why are lower level crimes not being enforced? That's the gateway to everything, is getting people boots on the ground, addressing the low-level crimes, because that leads to the higher-level crimes. And by not allowing that to happen, whether it's...
So when you talk about lower-level crimes, shoplifting would be one of those?
Oh, absolutely.
And are we just letting shoplifters do whatever they want?
Not according to the mayor, but you talk to any of the business owners that are dealing with it. One, a lot of them have stopped reporting. So that's a major issue, because the statistics that Albuquerque is presenting do not allow for that, and they're not showing that. And I'll give you an example, auto theft, for example. I actually had to call the state insurance group, because you want accurate people that are reporting their cars to the insurance as stolen. The mayor says, hey, we've had an 11% reduction. You talk to the insurance people, say, what is it for the Albuquerque area? They only have 8%. So somehow there's 3% that have been misreported, and the mayor's capitalizing on that and reporting it.
Are we or are we not still one of the worst places in the United States for car theft in Albuquerque?
Oh, absolutely.
So we might have improved a little bit, but crime and addressing the things that Chief Geier said earlier are not really happening.
No, not to a level that would appreciate any noticeable improvement. Absolutely not.
And I'm going to ask, let me go to Mr. Grover. Tom is an attorney. Tom, you served as a sergeant in the Albuquerque Police Department. Why did you choose to leave and go into law?
The administration at that time was extremely politicized. and I'm talking about the administration of the department. And what I saw was
This is 2010, 11?
around 2009, 2010, and then I left shortly thereafter. Actually, I had a bit of overlap while I was a graveyard sergeant and a daytime law student, which don't tell my professors what I was supposed to do. But anyways, the administration of the department was doing anything and everything it could to look good in the eyes of DOJ, to avoid any scrutiny by DOJ. And what that meant was that officers who I felt like, when I was representing them as a union rep, that had done very good police work and had maybe violated some administrative-based SOPs and further into that police work, were getting absolutely crucified, while others, for whatever reason, were essentially protected species and could do no wrong, instead of just being objectively investigated and let the chips fall where they may when it comes to discipline. So I started seeing completely disparate treatment, unfair treatment, directed treatment towards really good officers. And that did not sit well with me at all, because, I mean, these were people that I would be working with, and the ones that were protected were people who I really didn't want to work with. So that was an issue. And then there were some high-profile incidents where there was some gross misconduct by the command staff of the department that I was not going to be silent about. And so, ultimately I was put in a place where I either honor the oath that I took to wear the badge, or if I sat silent, I would violate it, and I was not going to violate it.
Well, I want to go back to some people that are listening right now or watching may get the idea that somehow we're talking negatively about police officers, and that's not what we're doing. We're talking about leadership. And where does that leadership start? Does that start in the mayor's office?
Well, at the top of the city, yes, he's the highest ranking official, and then the CAO actually was ahead of the chief of police. And as far as public safety, the same thing with the fire department. So those are the top positions: the mayor's staff, and then the individual staffs of each director and the facility or the area that they cover.
Well, let me just read a couple stats. And again, this is objective. We're trying to give voters as much information as they can as we have a municipal election coming up the first week in November. In 2024, Alaska had the highest violent crime rate, 724 offenses per 100,000. And New Mexico had the highest property crime rate, 2,751 per 100,000. USA News and World Report says in 2023, New Mexico was number 50 in low violent crime rate. In other words, we were at the bottom of the good list, which we seem to be that in so many categories, but political people don't have to give an account. You had to give an account of everything you did as chief. You came in, Chief Geier, right after the DOJ kind of took control of looking over with the court-approved settlement agreement, addressing use of force issues.
Yes.
And have those use of force issues been addressed, and is that a much better situation now in the Albuquerque Police Department, now that that's over as of 2024?
Well, I mean, yes, they set up some pretty high standards for reviewing use of force. Before, it was basically not a simplistic plan, but if there was a use of force, it would start with the sergeant doing a review, and it would go through the chain of command at that area command or whatever division that person was in. And since starting then, we have a whole two different divisions. We have the Internal Affairs Use of Force Division and Internal Affairs crimes,
Professional
standards, which is the other kinds of violations and misconduct that goes on. And
I apologize for interrupting.
Sure.
But preparing for this, we've talked about this a little bit. And one of the promises that the mayor made was that he was going to raise the number of police officers in the police force. Well, you've done a couple things just now that I'm interested in. I'm a retired banker. So as soon as you said we have a division that is addressing this and that takes personnel. But it's my understanding, and I want to just reference something. So I went into the budget of the Albuquerque Police Department, which is published on the city website. And according to the 2024 budget, 1,100 cops was their goal. The budget actually states they thought they would be able to reach 1,000, but that never happened. In fact, today I believe that we have less than 900 still. How many police officers do we need in Albuquerque proper to protect our city?
Well, I mean, I've seen some different studies as far as, per 100,000 people and things like that. But every city is a little different in terms of the people that live there, the type of demographics that are there, the type of drug problems, whatever, But there was a gentleman, his name is Bradley Day, and he posted a full-page ad in the Journal, I think it was last year, where he had researched and he looked at the Boston Police Department. Boston is a little bigger city, about 100,000 more than Albuquerque. Their metro area, same thing, is a little bigger. They have over 2,000 officers. And so we're down to, and especially in the field, there's probably less than 300 now in the streets actually working. So from 2,000 to even if we made that 1,200, we would still be understaffed. And I think coming from other departments, I mean, even as close as Rio Rancho, there's more of a visible presence of police in that city, even in the part of the areas where a lot of people don't live and things. Whereas in Albuquerque, I can drive for 20 minutes or a half hour through even busy areas and not see a police car.
Yeah, for some perspective, so when I came on in 1992, my first bid for the field in 93 was 440 officers in the field. That was back in 93. Okay, and so you're looking around at that time is around 45% was in the field. We're looking at what, 30%, 25% now, and the city being even larger than what it was. Community-oriented policing says that the backbone of the police department should be field officers, people out in the field dealing with the community, face-to-face, fighting crime out there in the city. It's not happening.
Thomas, in your work as an attorney now, you're helping to help police officers that are accused of wrongdoing. Are our police officers unsafe right now because of the lack of people in the field?
Oh, definitely. And it's a combination of things. I think there's a lack of staffing, not just in the city, but statewide. And there's a increased resistance by offenders, suspects, citizens at large, to recognize the authority that when they're stopped by a police officer, that it's a better course of action is to listen to what the officer is saying and comply with the commands that are put forward. Officers are facing much higher levels of resistance and combative behavior by suspects. And, with a culture that seems to not want to assert no to a population, it's sort of it's getting to a flashpoint where it's probably more dangerous to be a police officer nowadays than it ever has been for decades.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard recently, and again, I didn't verify these facts, but I've heard recently that we don't have very many juveniles in detention anymore. I think at one time we had a couple thousand. Does that mean juvenile crime is way down?
I think conversely, I think what the nation saw in the early 90s, where you saw these sort of juvenile super predators, are starting to emerge in another cycle, and that's what's happening right now. And why there's not why there's not data supporting juvenile offenders being incarcerated or whatnot, I don't know. I mean, that's a question for the courts. But what I do know is that the DA in our district seems to routinely be trying to get juvenile offenders who have been, charged with horrific offenses being tried as adults. And I think that goes in line with what's happening on a nationwide level, where you have these, juvenile offenders that are just committing some of the most unbelievably horrific acts.
Tom, correct me if I'm wrong. Don't they also have a no bail policy for the majority of juvenile crimes? They don't give them bail. They release them out of the jail back to their parents' custody and don't hold them no matter what the crime is.
Well, who decided that that's how they would address these crimes?
I mean, the rules that the courts follow come from the legislature. So, I mean, ultimately, the buck stops at the legislature.
So, Tom, is it unreasonable for us as voters to ask who in the legislature is responsible? Because we've talked about Mayor Keller. We've talked about the leadership in the city, which we're going to talk about that a lot more in this interview. But the legislature, it's interesting that that's been brought up because I don't think anyone in the legislature on either side of the aisle is willing to take responsibility for there being more crime in New Mexico than anywhere else in the country over the last 10 years.
I think that's totally correct. And I mean, that's a symptom of a one-party state, one party that essentially occupies the vast majority of all the elected offices in the state. I mean, New Mexico's last in child care and child development, yet we have a state government administration that wants to present all expenses paid for child welfare and child development. I mean, it's easy to go up when you have no other place to go in terms of being at the bottom. But that's a symptom of a one-party state. And I mean, just on the sheer competitive nature of the parties.
It would be very interesting to see, 40% increase, 20% increase in juvenile crime between 2020 and 2024. 40% of the carjackings are juveniles between the age of 11 to 17. 40%.
11?
11 to 17, yeah. And so there's a lot of things. I actually have just a slant when I've talked to my family about it and things like that. It's social media. You're seeing these kids committing crimes and they're putting it on TikTok as if it's something, glorified that they're doing. Hey, check us out. We're doing this. We're robbing this store. We're breaking into houses, and they're glorifying it somehow.
They actually caught the juveniles were stolen a car and they were driving early in the morning and the gentleman was riding his bike to work. And they're talking among themselves and actually videotaping it
yeah.
And they actually videotape hitting the gentleman and killing him. And I think the driver was 13, and I mean there were 3 other juveniles in it.
I've seen that video of the bicycle.
And so I mean that's the kind of thing is why are they out at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. after stealing a car and everything. And there's really, like we said, there's not much discipline or anything imposed by the courts. They're out the next day, and if the parents, and I mean with the Albuquerque schools, not being the greatest, academic area for students, and they don't really follow through with people that are not going to school and things like that, that's why it's happening. And so it's more of a not just a generic issue which just related to that, but it's more of a broad, involving other things, including the legislature and the people that deal with, education in the state.
Is this problem of crime in Albuquerque proper, and I know I think you mentioned earlier our whole state's experiencing this to some degree. In Albuquerque, though, is this problem so big that we can't solve it? Is it very complex, or is it just going to take some hard work? Where would you start with a plan, and what would you think each one of our mayoral candidates ought to come to the table?
I think, like what Brian said, I mean, it begins with visible police presence so that at least there's the appearance of consequence. And if the consequences are going to come in the mail because you ran through a red light camera, or you got picked up by a drone, which seems to be the new thing after this weekend, or the automated license plate readers, ALPRs, that's not going to do anything. You need to have highly visible police presence as sort of like your first level of triage. And I think if any of your listeners – and the reason why this works as far as doing an immediate reset, if any of the viewers or listeners were to speed through Jemez Pueblo, I think they know real quick that they're going to get a speeding ticket. And that's why pretty much when anybody goes through Jemez Pueblo, everybody goes to speed limit because there's just zero tolerance. And that sort of reset has to happen in the city. And I mean, there'll be days where I'll drive around and I'll see more private security vehicles than I'll see marked police units. And, a consequence that will happen when you have increased police contact is you're going to have increased, uses of force. and from use of force comes deadly force, and that's something that obviously the administration truly has an aversion of, but all of the mayoral candidates need to talk about getting marked visible units out there on some sort of basis that keeps the citizenry sort of on edge. Like, are they going to be in the Northeast? Are they going to be in the Southwest? Is there going to be a surge in the evening? Is it going to be during the day? When is it? So that the temperature is immediately brought down.
Chief Geier, you recently attended, I guess, a forum with the mayoral candidates.
No.
Was that Brian?
I did.
Brian.
Okay. I apologize. I couldn't remember who talked about that. But in that interview, you felt like there weren't real pointed questions and nothing really required of each candidate. They were able to talk about a plan in very generic terms.
Yeah, I think these forums, as opposed to being a debate, the forums, even the ones I've seen on TV, have been following the same format. Is they're lobbing these softball questions and then not challenging the answers, such as like Mayor Keller speaking about homeless, and his answer matched everybody else's. Oh, we need enforcement, we need quality of life, we need shelters, whatever that is. Matched a lot of the other candidates, but. Okay, you've been in place for 7 years. Somebody needs to come back and say, you've been there for 7 years. You've spent $300 million across the 7 years. How many homeless have you gotten off the street? Why is that number not lower for the city of Albuquerque? That challenge doesn't happen. It happens with the media doesn't do that either. They'll softball some stuff and he'll put out an answer and they'll say, okay, cool. And they'll just let it slide. And so it just dies on page 3 somewhere and nobody ever looks at it again.
Talk to us a little bit about some of the resources you had as chief and you're aware of around the country to help people come up with a plan.
Well, there's a couple major organizations. There's a Major City Chiefs in the United States, which is all the cities like over probably the top 50 most populated cities in the United States. And they have a regular meeting, and it's also in conjunction with an International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is like training conferences, there's seminars, there's webinars. People share information on what's successful in their organizations in terms of crime. One of them that I'll bring up was I attended and I saw the demonstration of ShotSpotter and brought it back, and we worked with the company, and today it's still in place from when we started it.
And I did notice on the City of Albuquerque website that Mayor Keller took credit for bringing that to Albuquerque.
Well, that's interesting because he really wasn't directly involved in it from the onset. To give you a short example of that was he was big in going to local businesses. So we would try to give our business to people that have businesses or stores or companies or different organizations. And so there was a smaller business that actually made similar things that ShotSpotter did. Nothing even close in quality or the extent of it, and they came and actually convinced them, and they put one of their ShotSpotters at the airport as an example. Well, it fell off the wall, and it wasn't working, and so he wanted us to go still with that company. But I guess at some point when they saw the video of how extensive, because this is something that the ShotSpotter that records from the sensors that are in the city. They're based in Texas, so they dispatch that from there. They analyze, even they can tell the difference in the caliber of the weapon used and how many shots are fired. And even more importantly, which is I thought when we were talking about officer safety, typically people only report about 20% of the shots fired because in some neighborhoods it happens every day and police don't come. It's not like the fire department where there's a fire, everybody comes. And then also you don't really know where it's at because it could have sounds like it's coming from here and it's really there. ShotSpotter has the ability to get within 50 meters and actually show, where exactly so the officer doesn't drive through a kill zone, so to speak. And then they can tie it in with Google Maps where they can actually go to that address and show what it would look like so the officer knows what he's looking for and for safety. And for crime fighting we can be on the scene quicker and maybe save people's lives if they're shot, or actually be able to catch the car as they're leaving or whatever the case. But also most of these leave evidence behind the casings, And so they can go to that area and recover those casings, and they put it in a system that works with the DEA in terms of, it's almost like fingerprints, that they can trace that to a specific gun. And so if there's a homicide and later on somebody gets caught with that gun, not only do you get a gun charge on it, but you can charge them with possibly related to the homicide. So what Keller, he eventually agreed to do it. It was a while because it was a very expensive venture. But they've expanded it since I've been there, and it's been. I'll give you one. When we were first running through the testing of it, one day in the Southeast, there were 95 gunshots, and that's just in one little area. Yeah, not the whole Southeast. I'm talking maybe, like a Trumbull, La Mesa area, one of those neighborhoods in there, 95 gunshots. And that's just one part of one area command. We had them in the Southwest, and we had them downtown as well. And so there's been probably a lot more in recent days. And as you see in the news, is officers are responding to these shot spotters, and that's when they're finding bodies in the street and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a very good program, but he did resist it at first.
Mike mentioned earlier about the International Chiefs of Police and Chiefs of Police Association. Again, it's not rocket science. And they put on what do they call it? A candidate toolbox. That's what they call it on dealing with crime. And it's a series of best practices that they've researched and discovered across the country and things that are working at that moment. There is the cops hiring program.
Is that available now?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
The cops hiring program gives lessons on recruiting and the best practices across the country and changes that need to be made. They not only talk about, here's how you go out and get an officer. They say, here's how you better your department to make it more attractive to officers to come, right? PERF. And hang on, I had to write it down because the Police Executive Research Forum. Yeah. Everybody just says PERF and nobody knows what it means. But they also have online seminars that for mayoral candidates specifically for dealing with metropolitan areas, saying these are best practices that we've found. Theirs leans more towards the health of the officer in both physical and mental health. But still, it's information that's out there to better the department, to get more officers in place and get a better city, protect your city.
So it'd be nice if we could come up, even as a result of this interview, with, hey, mayoral candidates, you need to do these 3 or 4 things, and there's outside resources to do that.
Sure.
I'm going to address this. Chief Geier, I'm going to have you kind of observe this, because you've been at the top of the department, right underneath the mayor and the executive. But these two guys, Tom and Brian, have both served, and I'm going to ask you a leadership question. Tom, why do you think the Albuquerque Police Department has failed miserably to even recruit 1,000 police officers since Mayor Keller came in as mayor of Albuquerque?
People become inspired to go into law enforcement. I mean, it's a calling. You don't necessarily go to it for money. You don't go for benefits. You go to law enforcement to help people, to be a first responder, to be the one who's running towards the gunfire as opposed to away from it. And if you're not inspired by the leadership of that department, I mean, you're going to look at other departments. I mean, I left a very high-paying job shortly after 9/11 to go into law enforcement because those desires were rekindled after those attacks, and I was struggling whether to go to a federal agency or stay local, and I chose local because the leadership and the people that I knew and met in the department were absolutely inspiring, and that's, I think, the absence of what we have now. I mean, we have a chief of police who, in a highly publicized incident, T-bones another vehicle, doesn't comply with state laws regarding the Pell Cam, which was a giant issue of controversy in 2020, and one of my own cases.
Claiming Fifth Amendment right is why he didn't have to comply.
Ludicrous excuses. And I represented one of the first officers in the country who was fired for not activating his lapel cam, so I'm pretty familiar with what the issues are. And, when there's a practice of, do what I say, not what I do, for law enforcement, that's an incredibly toxic paradigm, and it's not something that inspires, service for the agency.
Tom and I have talked about that. Actually, I think Mike was with us too, but there was at least 2 officers off the top of our head that were fired for the exact same thing by Medina. Talk about a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Rules for thee, but not for me.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I don't have law enforcement expertise, but I've seen the video very clearly. I've read the narrative. Medina said that he heard a shot, was trying to protect his wife. She was in the police vehicle. But what I saw is someone that was not running to the fire. He was literally running away from the fire and not paying attention to oncoming traffic. He hit that young man in a Mustang, and it's just a miracle that he lived.
Jim, change the scenario slightly. Let's say that Chief Medina was in a gun battle, and he fired his weapon. Now, when he fired his weapon, he didn't hit the bad guy. He hit somebody behind him, an innocent civilian. How is that any different than him running his car into traffic and ramming somebody, almost taking their life? There is no difference, and absolutely, he should have been held accountable for that.
And I've not heard of a prosecution.
No.
In regard to that.
None. And the civil case is still going.
Yeah, that's not to dwell on like one
Sure.
incident. It's just a pattern of presence. I mean, there are fitness standards to become police officers. He obviously doesn't fit that. There's never any acceptance of responsibility. There's always pointing fingers at other people. There's taking credit for the work of others. It's just sort of like this anti-leadership exemplification, whereas, with Chief Geier, you had someone that was competing in international police Olympics and representing the department on any number of ways and never, ever taking credit or seeking any spotlight. Is just lead by example and just sort of like this silent.
Tom, you're being a little harsh. Medina was in the hamburger contest just recently, and him and Mayor Keller both. They were eating hamburgers and then awarding the winner.
And I mean,
a little harsh.
It's just sort of like it's comical, right? And I talk with chiefs across the country. I'm not just pulling these observations out of thin air. I mean, I know what motivates me. I know what motivates a lot of officers in a lot of departments. And you want to be inspired constantly.
I'm limited in my experience. I used sports analogies with you three before, but I'm thinking, let's just take the University of New Mexico Lobo football program. Everybody's kind of jazzed by Coach Eck. And again, Coach Eck hasn't agreed to be part of our interview or anything, and I didn't ask him, but I do want to use him as a positive example. He's showing some great leadership, recruiting some good kids. I think he's brought in more than 70 players. Is it Chief Geier is being the chief of police like being a head coach and inspiring people to come to New Mexico and serve?
Well, and there's a lot of analogies that way. Obviously, leadership isn't just unique to law enforcement. You got major organizations, businesses, other government agencies, hospitals, and everything. Their success depends on the leadership. And when there's failed leadership, there's obviously businesses that go out of business and then they go broke and things like that. We've hit that level, I think, at this point in Albuquerque is when your primary protection of the citizens are the officers on the street, and their morale is affected, obviously because they're shorthanded. I've heard that sometimes they come in, they have very few people in an area command that's very busy. I think both of us can, that worked in the Southeast, we had shifts with 3 squads of maybe we had 30, 40 people working in a night. Now, in a whole area command, they're lucky if they have 4 or 5, I've heard, on some
to
shifts.
a supervisor. My biggest squad when I was a sergeant working, and it was in the Northeast, and I had between 12 and 15 people for a bid just to me. And it was like that my whole time as a supervisor sergeant out in the field. You always have if you had a small squad, people were jealous because they'd be like, you don't have to work. You only got 6 people in your squad. What the heck, because you'd have a few kind of like split squads that would relief squads they call them. But again, how are you effective as a supervisor when you only have 3 people underneath you, and how do you do TAC plans to address larger problems in an area with 3 people?
You can't be proactive.
Yeah.
And the thing is They come into duty from what I've just turned in. Cars have a computer, and in that computer is where dispatch calls are made, and there's a list of calls holding. And sometimes there's up to 30 calls holding at the start of the shift. Before they even get their car warmed up and hit the roads, there's 30 calls holding that they have to try to get through. And that's not counting the ones that are coming in as they are. So the dispatchers have to go by priority, and there's calls that don't get answered. And that's part of the problem too is, and 911 calls that are on hold for 30, 40 minutes, things like that. See that, and then you don't see anybody taking accountability for that. There's always excuses.
I'll give you a personal example of that. So I'm currently employed by Calvary Church, helping with their safety and security over on Osuna. And we had an incident one day where a man and a woman came into the church. The man assaulted her physically. She was 5 months pregnant. We got them separated. We contacted police. It took 84 minutes for an officer to arrive. And
again, this, Brian, and I don't want to. You really appreciate the guys on the street.
Absolutely.
And so we're not talking bad. We're just saying.
Well, no, it's not the officer's fault that this happened.
Yeah.
This goes to the administration. And I was so upset and frustrated by that. I wrote a letter to the mayor and all the city councilors and received one or two responses, nothing from the mayor, and it went to the chief also. Matter of fact, it was interesting. It got forwarded to the fire chief, and the fire chief actually wrote a response trying to kind of explain what they think's going on and things like that. It has nothing to do with the officers. The officers want to go. They want to come and fight crime, but they can't. One, they're handcuffed by the city administration, and two, because they're so shorthanded. I would not expect an officer to go in a situation by themselves where it was you have to have at least the two officers for safety purposes or more. If that's not available, how do you expect an officer to respond to a call?
Is a track record since 2017 as mayor with the current statistics, which as just a private citizen, I think there's so much data. It seems irrefutable that we're still at the bottom of the good list and at the top of the bad list when it comes to crime across the country. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Chief Geier. Where would you start if you're a voter questioning the leadership, and how should we come up with different leadership?
Well, I mean, the question of crime, and I know that they're making, the mayor has made comments to that we've reduced it lower than it's been the last decade or whatever. It's not true. And during COVID, crime went up. And talking about major city chiefs is going to those meetings. Everybody was having that kind of going on in almost every city. Crime went up, and Keller and everybody were saying, "Well, it's up everywhere else." Kind of like to defer it a little bit. It's like it's not just us. Well, now they're taking credit for, crime went down. Well, if you look at the first 2 years of this last term, after I left, and it was 2020, and I know when we look through the stats, is the 4 years that I was there, crime went down. And we pointed it out to Keller because that was one of the conflicts we had, is he said that crime has gone out of control. And it didn't. It actually went down, which surprised him and left him red-faced. But now, if you Google what's crime like in the United States, consistently, almost every major city has gone down. So that's the trend. Now, for us in Albuquerque, homicides went from the high 70s to over 110 the year after I left to 120-something the year after that. We were number one in auto theft across the nation, and then because of bringing in things like attack forces that involved the state police and Bernalillo County joint efforts, we brought it down that we got to number 5, which still isn't very good, but it's a big jump from number 1. And so that when they're taking credit for it is, it's like, well, yeah, you blamed it on it when it was before, when everybody was doing it. It's like everybody's having this problem, but they're not saying that now. They're not showing that. And it's easy to reduce crime when you're at the top. If you reduce, something from 100 to 99, you got a 2% reduction, and they're claiming, that there's big reductions. And we don't even know how many times they're being reported anymore, because a lot of people get frustrated waiting to report a property crime or their car being broke into or whatever, because it's like, well, why bother? Just go to the insurance company and deal with that, because nobody's going to come. And that's part of the problem is the biggest thing with police work is community policing is working with the public.
Mm.
And that means going to the call face to face. And I know all three of us would have done that is, you try to reassure the people that they're safe, and you try to reassure them that people are going to look for your property or going to do the job. When nobody comes is they don't get that. Not only don't they get a response, they don't get that follow-up.
I'll reiterate that what Mike was saying. I had an opportunity to attend the Old Town Business Association meeting. It was more than a year ago. But even at that time, they were so frustrated with break-ins and things that were happening, and nothing was happening. And even to the point where they weren't even sending a field investigator to come do fingerprints. They would have somebody come by. Once they did come by, they would take a brief report, then leave. And they were telling them, you can just call and do a telephone report. There's not going to be any investigation. There's not going to be any follow-up. It's just going to happen. So they stopped calling it in. So who knows how bad it is, truly. If they're not calling it in, you're not getting the data of auto accidents. They stopped going to auto accidents. Unless the vehicles are unless there's an injury, that's when they'll come out. Or it's stuck in traffic and then needs to be towed. They may send an officer then. I actually had a lady my wife works with called me and said she had just been in an accident, and they kept asking her, are the vehicles drivable? Are the vehicles drivable? And they weren't. And then they gave her the number of a tow company instead of sending an officer out because they didn't have one available. And they said, well, you could call a tow company and have your own vehicle towed and to a shop or something to start repairs. No officer to attend. And it's horrible.
Tom, I have something that's not on our list, but I was thinking about what you were saying about being in law enforcement as a calling. And I think that's confirmed with these two gentlemen in front of you and you as well. How does all of this affect an individual officer? You're providing legal support. I mean, their emotions, their mental state, that's got to be harmed by just the current conditions. Tell us how that turns into. I'm almost asking you a question as an attorney. Maybe we're trying to get you out of the attorney business. If it all gets fixed, you're not going to have any work.
That nothing would make me happier. I mean, every officer who comes into my office and we sit down and look at what's going on with their case and where things are, especially if they're looking at significant discipline or termination, we have the talk. And the talk is that your world is going to go upside down. And if you thought going through a door on a high-risk warrant service was terrifying or nauseating or emotionally challenging, you haven't seen anything yet. And when officers are unfairly or unjustly disciplined, it is some of the most toxic feelings that anybody can experience because it's not just a job. It's an identity. It's a calling. And when they're not being treated the same way as others. And I've done this long enough to recognize that something is afoot. This isn't just a basis of, forgetting to write a report or forgetting to submit evidence. There's a hammer coming down that suggests it's personally driven. It's like a true violation. It's a betrayal of trust. It's like a divorce of the worst order. And I see that over and over and over because they just can't believe that this is happening because police are rule followers. They enforce laws, they enforce statutes, and they expect the department to follow the same rules and statutes that govern the conduct of everybody. And when they see administrators violating those provisions, whether it's trumping up charges, putting forward discipline that's completely inconsistent with other practices, it becomes very personalized.
What's the motivation for the leadership doing that? Is it all CYA?
I think it's two things. I think it's sometimes people are seeking promotion, and there's this inverse benefit where like the more bodies you can show in your wake, the more promotable you are. So there are actually people that cannibalize their own department for self-advancement, which is completely pernicious and just so toxic it defies belief.
When the training that they're putting forth in the academies is focused on dealing with the CASA ruling and the settlement with the DOJ, as opposed to training them to be street cops, you're going to have a problem.
So let's talk about that, Brian. And let me make sure our viewers understand. So the court-approved settlement agreement, CASA, was basically the Department of Justice's oversight because there were many complaints and I guess some evidence that use of force was out of control in APD. This agreement was established in 2014 following a so-called investigation. And I say so-called investigation because I've never seen any factual evidence. And what I mean by that is today don't we still have more shootings and more use of force incidents than we had before DOJ?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess as a citizen, I don't understand what the whole purpose of the oversight was. It was very expensive. I know there were criticisms leveled to James Ginger, who was the person in charge of overseeing, everything. I looked at some interesting data that said he was also overseeing a department in Seattle and also in New Orleans, and both of those departments were having the same trouble recruiting that we have had. I find that an interesting coincidence. Again, I'm just asking questions. I want to know why this happened. Was there any silver lining to the DOJ oversight, Chief Geier?
Well, in a lot of ways, it actually set us back, is what I saw. Because what happened is and I think we've kind of hit on a little bit a couple minutes ago, is when I took a few months off before I retired. I used some of my vacation time and things like that. But when I left in October, our IA bureau had like 6 detectives and a sergeant, I think, and a lieutenant in charge of it. There was no use of force division. I think there was some kind of unit that did go out and review force, a few officers. They increased the size of that, and these are sworn, for the most part, sworn personnel, where we went from a total of, and I think you could talk when Middleton was in charge of that, we had like maybe 10 people in force division. Now they have like 40 people. Mm-hmm. And then that doesn't include the rest of the bureau.
They have more people doing that than are working in some of the area commands.
Yeah. Right. And so they
again, not enough officers on the street. Mm-hmm. Total in service 800 and change, and a whole bunch of them in administrative positions checking out police officers.
Right. As well as other things, is they had 270 some paragraphs that we had to comply with. And in doing that, we had to take manpower away from the street in order to meet their minimum standards. A big area with that was in crisis intervention. They had 20-some detectives or something in crisis intervention. Now, when I was in charge of the Family Advocacy Center, which had that unit, I had 2. And so, and that doesn't mean we couldn't have used more, obviously, but it was a newer program. The thing with use of force and some of these discipline things is, I always took the time as you look at the big picture. You just don't say, okay, well, he did this, and that. You have to look at his character. Is this a continuing problem? Is this something we can direct by training? Or is this something that he needs to go? Okay, he's had 3 strikes and he's out. We probably had just under 300 IA cases for the year. Medina made a statement, and I can't remember exactly what public forum it was in, where he said he was playing up to the DOJ. He said, well, we're going to be tough on these people, meaning the officers. We're not going to tolerate, we're not going to be lenient. We went from 300 to 900. And officers, we lost 100 and some 120 some officers because, first of all, they're getting a different policy to review each week, that they were responsible for, which they couldn't even keep up. They were getting charged with petty, they're getting, they call a letter when they get a letter that's a demand that they have to go to an IA case.
Do you remember what happened with the SWAT team?
Oh, yeah.
They came up with one of the new rules that they were going to apply for CASA, for DOJ tolerant. They were going to make it retroactive. So essentially, they were going to go back and review all the SWAT call-outs to see if it violated the policy that they had just come up with. And the majority of the SWAT team quit on the spot. And they said, we're no longer going to be your tactical team. We're going to go out into the field. And Medina responded to that with, well, I don't care. We'll just get people who do want to be SWAT and we'll send them for some training. And now all of a sudden we have a new SWAT team. All the experience all of the ability and training that those officers had gone in an instant because of a very, very poor policy and a poor implementation of that. Why they would do that's ridiculous. And officers, I think we would all agree this creates hesitation in the officer. They cannot respond to things appropriately because the first thought that crosses their mind is, am I going to get fired for what I'm about to do? As opposed to relying on their training and relying on that, because that's what you're going to fall back on is your training.
In this internal insurrection, it isn't even limited to the tactical team. I mean, there was the ERT, the crowd control team, where the fifth floor, Medina and his deputy chiefs, moved against a sergeant that was trying to do the right thing, and they put him instantly on leave, targeted him for a myriad of SOP violations. And then basically everybody on the ERT team said, we're done. Here's your gear. We're walking out. And
as an attorney, would you say that those were false accusations?
I think they were unsupported, and I think they were knee-jerk reactions based off of politics and public perception to something that happened. And the citizen that was the focal point of all this controversy became a client. So again, I'm pretty informed in terms of what was going on with the dynamics with ERT. And then so they had this big meeting at the academy with Chief Medina and Deputy Chief Mike Smathers. And the attitude was, if you guys don't get along with us, there's going to be a special master and we're all going to lose our jobs. And, there wasn't anything other than just browbeating upon the ERT team. So, it's rules for thee, not for me, but it's also the beatings will cease when morale improves is also the mantra of this administration.
Yeah.
It's a great model way to destroy a police department.
So if you wanted to challenge directly each of the mayoral candidates, and that would include Tim Keller, even though he's been in place for a long time, I get the sense that he's used up all his tries with you three. But there might be voters that are interested in seeing him make changes. They'd have to be fairly drastic, though. Tell me what you want to challenge each mayoral candidate with, and we'll go forward from there.
Well, first of all, have a plan to increase the staffing. And that doesn't just include the recruiting of new officers, but the placement of the officers where you have. If you've got, I've heard there's like up to 70 of these appointed positions. It means they didn't get promoted to that or they were brought in from outside that are in little niches all over the city. And I would say knowing as a detective, when you do stuff, you're not 24/7 at your desk. You sometimes take some time or go and talk to your neighbor in the next cubicle. And I think we need, if there's nothing else, get those people out on the street. Okay, get them out. We'll give them their cars and everything, and also get them to work as far as a proactive plan that's unified across the city. Don't just go out, drive up and down every neighborhood. There should be directed patrol. And we've got, from the Real-Time Crime Center, we've got that data. We've got, almost daily where we could tell where crimes were. And if you do that kind of directive action, even if there's been studies saying that even if you just sit there for 15 minutes and then go away and come back at another time on different times each day, it'll make a difference in that area. And they need to do that. They need to get those people out. And if that was the case, that could be 40 more officers on the streets when there's at the times and places where crimes are. You're not going to see your crime go up. You're going to see it go down, and you're going to see more arrests. But the difference too is, I would tell especially the leaders that are at the mayor's office, is don't just go by numbers. That you're talking just quantity and saying. I mean, you'll see then as we had this big operation and we wrote 300 tickets and made so many more arrests or whatever. Yeah. I mean, they're out there every day, and the thing is that it shouldn't be the quantity; it should be the quality. What's the outcome? Did you really reduce crime then for just maybe for a couple of weeks, and then 6 months later it's all back to where it was? That impact it's like, how can I put it? For show, okay? It's all like window dressing, and it's all fake promises and things like that. And they live by that. They follow through by the numbers. I mean, one of those, like the people we were talking about, it's a numbers game. They divide their efforts toward numbers that the public doesn't know any difference. I mean, if remember when the state police first came, they made a lot of arrests. And what happened? Those were coming from different counties and cities, and they didn't show up in court. How many of those? Remember, I think it was Channel 7 that did a study that said probably less than 20% of them were ever, found guilty or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't just do things for show. You have to, and the thing too with leadership is I can be the boss, but that shouldn't, the efforts that they're doing on the street should come down from the ground level, because the officers know the beats they work in, they know the areas they work in, the sergeants know which officers are the best ones to use.
Yes.
So, Chief Geier, are you saying that police officers need to be able to work independently?
Well, they have to have that autonomy to be able to make their judgments. You can't get something where I sign off as a chief and say, well, here's the policy, we're going to do this, okay? And just that's what it is you tell them, you kind of give them the ability to do what they want. Because if you tell, not what they want in terms of anything and goals, but give them the idea that, you come up with a plan and you try to do it, and then you look for that accountability too, because then they're going to, if it's their baby, they're going to work hard to make it look good and then what I try to do is not make it a competition, but each area command, we were taking on the efforts they were making and showing some area commands, like when we did what's called a Duke City Stats, is where we did the accountability meetings. They look bad when they're the low man on the table, and they want to improve. And it's, if you show those kind of things, if you have like a scoreboard, the analogy that I always use, and it's a basketball one, by the way, is that if the four of us are playing just pickup or just playing games and shooting and whatever, it doesn't make any difference, But as soon as we start playing for score, you're going to play a little bit harder. And you're going to put a little more effort, because it's like winning is part of our nature in human beings. Is you don't want to be that one left out.
Competitive.
And so there's other ways of being, good leaders is you do lead from the front, but you don't necessarily have to be out there. If you let your people do what they're supposed to do, and you just oversee and give guidance, and I think that's what a mayor should do for his police chief too. Don't do what Tim Keller did, is where, they're basically, and I'll give you the best example of that. We have organizational charts for the whole department. Every division in the city has an organizational chart, and in those charts are the different bureaus, okay, and then broken down. And it's never happened before, because I've seen organizational charts for 20 years before I became the chief in Albuquerque. On our charts, this is the police department one. I can understand the one for the city is where it's the mayor, the CAO, and then the police chief or the fire chief or whatever it may be. On my charts, I was under the CAO on the city one. But she was ahead of me on every of our organizational charts, which essentially people were saying, well, who is the chief of police? And so if she did not have the knowledge or ability to make decisions that were, affecting the officers or the city itself.
It cannot instill more trust and faith in your leadership by having somebody who has no background in crime fighting or law enforcement at all telling you how to do your job. Absolutely ridiculous. And I know Mike had this in spades from the Chiefs. And I know he fought for his people, but, the boss is the boss. You kind of have to go to a certain extent on that.
So, Brian, let's just say I'm running for mayor, and I make a statement at a speech, like the one you went to the other day. I have a plan to reduce crime in Albuquerque. How would you put me on the spot? I mean, they're all saying that, right?
Give me your top 5 list on how you're going to do it.
And obviously, I wouldn't be able to tell you, except now I would, because I've learned a lot from you three. One, you got to figure out how to get 1,600 officers.
Yeah, 17.
17.
Yeah, I'd go for 17.
So in the city. And that's achievable?
Over time. It's going to take some time. I don't think they could go out right now, especially with the state the city is in the administration. But you have to eliminate the bloat. You have how many positions did Keller create? 60 to 80?
In his
of higher than the rank of lieutenants. You have all these people that are riding a desk. They're not cops. They're administrators. They're not going out and fighting crime. They're not doing the job that they should be doing. You have to reduce that bloat. Number one. Number two, you have to take the handcuffs off of the officers. A good way to do that is you get supervisors supervising. You put the power back in the sergeant's hands, just like Mike was saying. As a sergeant, I could go to my people and I say, hey, I got a complaint that there's speeders on this street over here. Who's responsible for that area? You two. Fix it. Let me know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and let me know what the results are. And then I could report that up to the captain. If they failed, then I could get involved and say, no, you need to do something different. Here, you're going to run radar instead of, using a stopwatch or whatever foolish thing that may have been happened. You have to do that and to get things moving forward, and then recruit. Spend some of that money that's unrealized pay and benefits that they're going with the 1,100 officers that aren't there. Put that to recruiting heavily. Send people across the country, any like NIMI, the military schools, kids that have a propensity towards they want a disciplined something. And they're in those military institutes. That's just one as an example. I'm positive Mike's done that, but I don't see any results of that they're doing. I talked to one of the recruiters 2 weeks ago, and he was like, they're not doing that. They're putting out Facebook, they're pushing things on Facebook, but you're not actually sending people out to other states and like job fairs or
colleges, criminal justice programs. I went to the base. They would have me give a speech when the one group that are moving out, looking for jobs, civilian, because they're getting out of the military. We'd reach out to them, and we're given copies of my book and stuff to try to motivate these people too. And we had, we actually received some good people in the military with their training. Their discipline is aligned to the law enforcement too, and they brings a lot to the table. And so I think that the colleges, they have job fairs, with graduation when, those classes are graduating in their senior year. Got Colorado, Arizona, Texas. There's academies where people can go their own way to the academy, and then they try to get in a department. But if a department's not hiring, find those people, and say, hey, you want to be like a semi-lateral position, come here and we'll give you a cash bonus and things like that. Those bonuses, I think our best recruiters are our officers. And I think if they would actually go out and, could get two, we have even if we only have 800 people, that's 1,600 officers if they each could get two.
You have to make some big changes for the officers that are out in the field today to go to somebody and say, hey, I'm thinking about applying for Albuquerque Police Department right now. A lot of these field officers are going to say, no, don't do it. Mm-hmm. Go somewhere else.
So if again, I'm running for mayor and I say, I'm going to recruit 1,700 officers, how that's going to be achieved. You got to be on campuses. You've got to be talking to high school students. You got to be talking to college students. You need to be talking to military schools. These are all ideas that I'm not sure that any of the candidates have really thought through. Tom, how are you going to put me or any other candidate on the spot and really be able to discern whether or not I'm going to be a qualified leader?
I think you have to recognize that politics put APD in its place where it is right now with the implementation of the CASA, and politics remove the CASA from APD with the appointment of the U.S. attorney following or prior to Keller getting reelected, and calls being made to have the temperature brought down of the scrutiny against the APD. That's what happened behind the scenes. And there's two of those people are candidates for mayor. One's running for reelection. I think the first thing is, what are you going to do to get politics out of law enforcement? Because that's been a albatross for the department for at least the last 15 years.
What's an idea, not the idea, but an idea about how you would choose a new chief?
Basic model is like, is this someone who's going to inspire more people to come to the department because they'll be out there leading from the front. They'll be knowledgeable. They'll have a resume that speaks of successes. Will they be out interacting with cadets on PT exercises? Will they be leading supervisors and command staff at ICE, International Association of Chief of Police conferences? The U.S. military was facing a staffing shortage, And they've turned that around. And regardless of what people's perspective is on Secretary Hegseth, it's pretty clear that he's led the service agencies from the service departments from the front and has inspired people to go back into the military for all the right reasons.
Great example. Because you know what he did first thing when he stepped in? Hegseth said, I support the military, period. And then he proved it. He showed that and demonstrated it week 1, week 2, week 3. He continually did things to show that, and people saw that. Recruiting numbers started coming in.
Yeah, he fights with Congress. He goes to bases and does PT at the crack of dawn. I mean, he is out there exemplifying everything that he wants to see in, his privates or his airmen or whomever. And that's what this department needs, is just craving leadership of that order. It doesn't need a political appointee. It doesn't need a person that happens to check whatever DEI boxes that Keller favors. And make no mistake about it, he's still driven by that sort of landscape. So it's got to be an inspirational model, and all the other things that we've talked about, tactics on the street, investigation tactics, will follow from a person like that. And I'm not suggesting that the solution is simply a messiah figure for the department. It's going to take more, but it is going to take commitment and resolve for the mayor's office to be like, let's let the police department do what it needs to do with the right population leading the department. I mean, I looked at some of these numbers. I mean, the police department is $275 million. I think anybody and everybody needs to question whether or not the citizens are getting a value for that amount of money. It eclipses the budgets for basically any other standalone agency in the Southwest by tens of millions, if not more than $100 million.
Yeah. Well, over the past couple years, Phoenix has had a recruiting boom. They've got more people than they can handle coming in and applying for jobs, qualified people. And so they don't have to lower standards to get people in place. They don't have to do that. But they're doing what, follow that model. They are sending people out saying, come to sunny Phoenix, be a cop with us because we want you and we support you. Have it happen. But
I've said many times, and I think all three of you to some degree are outdoors people. And that's one of the reasons you live in New Mexico and you like it, right? I just think when you look at the geography, when you look at where we're located, when you look at the outdoor activities, when you look at just the beauty we have, this is a great place to live. But for some reason, we can't lower crime. We can't improve education. And the people in leadership aren't taking any responsibility. The hardest thing for me, though, as a voter, is how do you hold a candidate accountable for what they say? Because you've already quoted, Chief Geier, what Tim Keller said when he was first elected and then made similar comments his second term. And none of those things, as far as I can tell, have actually come to fruition in his time as the mayor of Albuquerque. So, again, let's close this with what should voters be requiring of the next mayor of Albuquerque?
Well, it's a matter of integrity. Okay, you stand by your word. And if you don't come through on those promises, people aren't going to believe in you. They're not going to want to follow you, and they're not going to trust you. And I think that's the whole thing with the politicizing law enforcement is if you don't know what you're talking about, you're going to create rifts with not only within the department, but it'll carry on to the community itself. And it may be just some simple little things, but I wouldn't go to a doctor's office and say, well, you need to operate this way or do things like that. And that's essentially what was happening. And it wasn't just with the mayor, but his CAO was just as bad. She was the one that was actually, like I said, running the department. I'd have to answer to her once a week on different projects and things like that, which is okay. I have no problem. It's part of their oversight of the city. But when they actually are starting to get in operational issues, you're doing the wrong thing. Because, we all know better from experience is what works and what doesn't just in our own areas, but again, from the other cities and stuff that have practices. If you go online and you just research what are best practices for gun violence, there'll be pages and pages. And we actually, and I think you were part of that little group that we did where we tried to offer, like through a group of citizens, is some solutions to gun violence. And what did they tell us? Oh, we're already doing that. And they weren't. I mean, it was just a matter of, we don't need any help. And so, I mean, I if someone were to come and say, hey, I've got some people that will sit on this store, because it's getting broken into all the time. I know you don't have enough people. We'll just sit there and, protect the store. Go at it, I mean, don't bring shotguns and start shooting people, but do something that gives back to the city. I mean, that's what neighborhood policing is all about, is you're supposed to, neighborhood watches, you watch out for your neighbors. If we could get everybody in the city to do that and actually not have this attitude as, well, not my problem, or I don't want to get involved, this city crime would drop. It's not just law enforcement. I think you had mentioned Peel,
Robert Peel.
Robert Peel, his back in the 1800s said is the police are the public and the public are the police. And that's what really makes it. And the police legitimacy is based on the trust of the public. They won't report crime, or they won't turn people in if they feel that they're going to get in trouble or they're going to get killed if they snitch on somebody, if they don't trust the police to come through and do their part. And so I think we've lost that connection. We got citizen police commission, groups, and we got neighborhood associations still. We have National Night Out. We make a big show of all of this, but I can tell you, I don't see it happening. We have a neighborhood association, and it's a relatively safe neighborhood. There's no problems, but I don't really see, a big connection as where they have any involvement in helping the police department, or the police department even seeking their help. And that's that connection that we were lacking in here. And I think if you look at that, and then you go to all the things like the lack of laws in the legislature, how long they take to pass a law, or things that don't get passed at all that should. And I've been up there and I know how they operate. It's the whole big package isn't working here. And it's not just Albuquerque, it's New Mexico too. I mean, we're one of the worst in the world, right? In some of these.
I remember when I was a rookie officer, being a little bit on the totem pole, I got assigned by the captain to go to a neighborhood association meeting. Much to my joy. It was my first neighborhood association meeting as a rookie officer. So I go, and very diligently, they're saying we have issues 1, 2, 3, 4. I very diligently wrote those down. And great. I came back, I made a report to the captain, put it in his box. He came into briefing that night, and he says, where's McCutcheon? And I said, that's me, sir. And he goes, why in the hell did you put this in my box? And I said, I wanted you to see what they were talking about. He goes, you're supposed to fix these issues. So you get with the sergeant, and you find what you need to fix these issues. That's why I sent you. It's not my job. It's your job, right? And so that was kind of my introduction to figure out a way to do it yourself. And the supervisor, of course, was like, figure out a way to do it. I will back you on it. And, so that's how things are being. They're not doing that now.
No direct intervention. With all the things we've talked about, if no changes are made in our upcoming municipal election, Mr. Grover's going to be a very wealthy attorney with like 16 associates. Am I wrong?
No, unfortunately, I don't think you are. I think the status quo needs to be challenged, and that begins with not electing the incumbent. So that's the task that the voters have in front of them. I appreciate you bringing us in to have this discussion, because it's not happening out on the main networks or even in the primary publications. There's just very little scrutiny going on, and certainly a lack of understanding to the degree of which a lot of these issues have been addressed over and over with this current administration, whether it's in Santa Fe or here in Albuquerque. So it needs to be scrutinized, and I think people need to recognize that it's like, if you've hired a roofer to fix a leak in your roof, at what point are you going to recognize that, you know what, it is time for a new roofer because this guy has not fixed the leak? You're not going to keep throwing money at it for the same roofer to do the same things. It's time for an absolute change. And, at the very least, you'll get change.
Well, in Keller's case, he would call a plumber to fix the roof. So
probably.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think when you look at the budget for the city and the budget for the police department, it truly is jaw-dropping for what we're getting, or more importantly, what we're not getting, which is safe streets, reliable emergency services when we need them, not just when there's a 4-vehicle, fatal accident at, Paseo and San Pedro or something like that, but when a kid is having a seizure on a soccer field, when a mom goes to their car and sees that it's been broken into outside of a supermarket, or even as what has happened at my office where someone's at lunch and they get carjacked.
Yeah.
Those days need to come to an end. And the most efficient way to address that is a swift, fast police response to address it. And that's not happening. It hasn't happened. And I don't think Killer, frankly, wants it to happen. So,
well, gentlemen, we're going to take this interview and we're going to publish stories in the NewMexicoSun.com. We're going to take your quotes and we're going to share those on social media, all in the interest of educating voters. So I hope that if you're a voter, that you're going to go out and vote, exercise your right. First week in November here, 2025, the municipal election, we'll be electing some city councilors, we'll be electing a mayor. These three gentlemen have suggested that the leadership of the Albuquerque Police Department needs to be changed. One thing that I forgot to ask is, I don't think salaries are really an issue, are they? The police department's actually now paying officers a living wage. Would you say that's true?
It's a competitive wage. It gets people in the door, and then there's overtime opportunities. But that's not the primary element or variable as to why people become police officers, or more importantly, why they stay police officers. It's job satisfaction, it's camaraderie, it's making a difference, it's good morale. I mean, I'm not saying that financial elements aren't part of the part of the mix or the assessment. They are, but they're certainly not the top of the list.
It is absolutely truly a calling that's attached to a 25-year pension. So
you don't join the police department to get rich.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You join a police department to make
You
a
become a
difference.
lawyer to become rich.
Yeah.
You're getting picked on top. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I think the information you've given us is going to be wonderful for the public to digest. I hope that they'll respond to, social media and give their input. And I hope that the questions that you've raised today will be things that they ask of our candidates. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Jim,
having
thank you.
us.